Well, hello, avid readers. I'm so excited to have Jen Turano here. We are talking about her brand new book. I cannot wait to get into it because it's so different and so fun and so cool and quirky and exciting like she is. But first of all, Jen, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I shall do that. Thank you so much for having me again, Trisha. And I'm Jen Turano. I write historical romantic comedies set in the Gilded Age. I mostly, primarily write for Bethany House. I've been writing for them. My first book came out in 2012. This book is number 20 something with them. I always forget which one. And I live outside of Denver, Colorado. I'm not from Denver, Colorado. I'm originally from a small town in Ohio called St. Clairsville. And I did not major in English. People always just assume that because I'm an author. I majored in fashion and I worked in fashion for years. And that is why I have this love of old fashioned department stores. So when you read a lot of my books, you will find old fashioned department stores in them. And in the book that we're talking about today, beautiful cover, meeting her match.
Yes.
There's a department store in here that was around back then. It started in 1850. It's called Stone and Thomas. One of my first retail jobs ever was at Stone and Thomas department
Wow.
store, and they're the reason I ended up majoring in fashion because I loved working in that store. Let's see, personal. I have been married for 30 plus years to my husband Al, and we have one son, Dominic, who is out of the house. I'm an empty nester, and he just recently moved to Boise, Idaho. He's an engineer. There you
Wow.
go.
And I love, so you mentioned fashion and department stores, and I think your books definitely have that element. We have that you talked about the Gilded Era, which I want you to talk about what that means and then how that is tied into fashion. So right from the beginning of this book, she's like floundering with all these layers of clothing to find a weapon. We'll get into that in a second. But talk about the Gilded Age and fashion and why this era really drew you in.
So I did not know when I originally started writing. I mean, I tried a bunch of different genres, and we've talked about that before. I mean, it took me 5 years and seven different manuscripts before I found an agent. And then, but I had started off writing middle grade for my son. Went through all that thing, the middle grade, the young adult. I did literary fiction, and it was just right when I was about ready to just stop. I had set a goal for myself of how long I was gonna like it was gonna take me to move into this business. Plus, my son was starting to get old enough by this time to where I could have gone back to fashion, but I chose to be a
Mhm.
stay-at-home mom because fashion was crazy. The hours were crazy, and so anyway, so sorry about that. My thing just went off. So I was gonna quit, and one of my girlfriends said you should write a Fabio book, and I said Fabio. I'm like, do me historical romance, and it's so funny, Trisha, that I never thought to write that because I read historical romance all the time. So I did, but the first book I ever wrote was in the Regency period, and then while I was
Mm.
shopping that to agents, I read this book about Alva and Consuelo Vanderbilt, and it was set. It obviously was set in the Gilded Age, and I did not know that much about the Gilded Age. But after that book, I went and got this book. It was called "The Court of Mrs. Astor," and after that, I was like, well, "This is like fascinating," and there was so much gossip, and there were all these rules, and it was high society, the New York 400, um, and Mrs. Astor and Ward McAllister, her like sidekick, made up the rules so that the nouveau riche, all these people with the Industrial Revolution who had made new money, they were not allowed into those hallowed circles. So it just was crazy. And the fashions at the time. So I started, I think my first book was set maybe like in 1883. So we're into the Gilded Age a little bit more, but in 1883, might have been 1881, I'm sorry. But 1883 was when it started getting really crazy because Alva Vanderbilt,
Mm.
who was considered no, Mrs. Astor would not let the Vanderbilts, even though they had more money than anybody, into the New York 400. And Alva Vanderbilt got herself invited into the New York 400. So right around that time is when bustles were really getting out of control. So it had gone from like the Civil War, the big panniers that they wore, the hoop skirts to, and then all of a sudden it shifted to the silhouette was your backside. And so the women would put themselves into the corsets, it was still your goal was the 18-inch waist. And so their organs literally were damaged tremendously from all these things. And now you're putting on a bustle on your behind. And by 1885, they had gotten so large that they literally, it looked like you had a bear on your backside. And there's different kinds. There's like, there literally are spring loaded bustles where they would sit and it was almost like a coil, but sometimes you would, there was one of my books where she literally gets propelled out of her chair because that would happen. But when I was majoring in fashion, I had to take all these tailoring classes and historical costumes. So I have made it like handmade a bustle before, and I've done corset and all those things. And it's the whalebone is just it's so uncomfortable. But so when Camilla when she opens up, so she is on this horse, and yes, now her bustle would not be as large because now all of a sudden then you're starting to see women are starting to rebel and the size of the
Mhm.
bustle goes down. It's a little bit more manageable. But still she would have had, the chemise, the camisoles, she would have had the petticoats. I mean, yes, for her to be able to find a weapon that was she had attached to her leg, it was quite the feat.
I love that, and that's how the book opens. So she is on horseback,
Yeah.
and they are out for a morning ride, and then they're being chased, and all of a sudden we are in the middle of this drama, which is again very different. Usually, you have either a fitting room, a dressing room, a ballroom. Those types of things are usually the opening setting, and right away I'm like, wait. What's happening? What's going on? So, tell us a little bit about your story idea and why you decided to start it this way, and just really the action is going right from the first page.
So Camilla, our heroine, she in the first book, A Match in the Making. I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of that handy. She just was on the page. She like made an appearance just on a page. She was not actually in the storyline. They just referred
Mm,
to this matchmaker, Camilla, who was like an exceptional matchmaker within the
mhm,
400. And the unusual thing about Camilla is that she is an unmarried woman who is a grand American heiress. And there's a reason she's unmarried. She suffered this horrendous heartbreak the year of her debut by a scoundrel. And
scoundrel,
scoundrel. And
scoundrel.
she has said she's vowed she's never going to marry. But so she would help. She decided that she was going to help other young ladies find love matches. So she's kind of backed off from the whole matchmaking thing, and so then she shows up in book two. She actually shows up. So this is Adelaide's story. And so Adelaide, um, she needs a lot of help. And so the hero in To Spark a Match is very good friends with Camilla. So he asked her if she will take Adelaide in hand. So she kind of comes out of retirement. Of course, and she has to dabble in matchmaking or whatever. And she was just very proper. And so I thought when I was going to do her story, I'm like, you know what? It has to be a fish out of water story with her because,
Mhm,
and it's so difficult. I find, and I'm sure you do as well, to keep your writing fresh, to make it different, especially when so my publishing house likes to keep me in the Gilded Age. I'm known as the Gilded Girl, so I stick with like New York, the high society, and but after you start getting into books that you're going into your 20s, books like you have to think of something different. So I said, okay, you know what? Like, what am I going to do with her? Like, how am I going to like just really just get her out of her comfort zone? So that's why I thought, I'm just going to have her almost abducted, like right from the get go. So she's retreated to um, so the members of the very wealthy families, they always had their homes on Fifth Avenue, and those homes had started closer to Central Park at the get go. That's where Mrs. Astor, she was the society queen. She had a brownstone there, and it's like a brownstone sounds like not extravagant, but this was like floors, just absolutely gorgeous
wow.
interior. The outside was a little boring because Mrs. Astor was considered a knickerbocker, and they weren't flashy. They had a lot of money. They were
Mm,
very, very, very proper. Well, then when Alva Vanderbilt comes to town, she builds this monstrosity. It's a showstopper piece on the other side of Fifth Avenue. So what you see is all of high society starts moving from where Mrs. Astor is down toward Alva. So all these members of the 400, they would have their homes on Fifth Avenue, but then they'd also have their cottages in Newport, and they weren't cottages; they were these grand mansions. It was just their like kind of inside thing to call them a cottage. But they also had in the spring when they weren't going to Paris to buy their clothes at Charles Worth, the salon, they would repair to their spring and fall home, which was on the Hudson River Valley. So that's
Oh.
where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take Camilla and I'm gonna put her in the Hudson River Valley. And that house is was inspired. I went there and Fred Vanderbilt, he was a black sheep of their family. He married a woman, I believe she had been divorced. It was quite the scandal. He got like basically shunned by the rest of his siblings. They this beautiful mansion that it's open to the public. It's right down from the Roosevelt House. So I went there and I was really impressed with that house. So I always wanted to use that in some story. So that's where Camilla is. And when she is on the Hudson, she's not being um, protected by the bodyguards that protect her because it really was a thing for the members of the New York 400. They were afraid of kidnapping because it
Mhm.
had happened and people were held for ransom. And they even at one point, A.T. Stewart, he was not a member of the New York 400. He had a house right across from Mrs. Astor, and he had a dry goods store. She would not acknowledge him. And she made the remark that just because I buy my carpets from him doesn't mean I would invite him over to walk across them. Very snobbish.
What?
Yes, but he was very wealthy. When he died, Trisha, someone stole his body out of the morgue and they held it for ransom. And years went by, and his widow finally she had paid someone a ransom, and so finally she was given a bag of bones, but there was never any like it was
Oh my
we didn't have
goodness.
DNA back then, so they couldn't actually prove that she was given her husband's remains back. So yes, so that's why Camilla, when she would be in the city or traveling to Paris, or she would be in Newport, she would be accompanied by at least one guard, if not more. But on the Hudson, that's her freedom zone. But it turned out, no, somebody was out to get her. So there you go.
Okay. So right from the beginning, we have this chase,
Yes.
and we see her. She knows what's happening. She's worried about getting kidnapped. She's on this horse, trying to hold on, trying to get to her weapon, which she is under layers of clothing. So we have that right from the beginning. Where does the hero come in the story?
So he Okay, I had to look at his name because I just drew a blank. So Owen Chesterfield is the hero of our story, and Owen has come to New York. He is from Wheeling, West Virginia, and um and I grew up 12 miles away from Wheeling, West Virginia, and I've always wanted to set a story there. And this just seemed, again, the fish out of water story. I said, you know what?
Mhm.
I'm going to take Camilla and I'm going to take her to Wheeling. So I needed the hero who was going to be the reason why she goes to Wheeling. So Owen comes in. Well, Owen has this sister who she has been delivered a grave insult from her childhood friend. She always thought she would marry him. He goes off on his grand tour, comes back to Wheeling, and informs Owen's sister that he can no longer have anything to do with her. She does not possess enough manners to be around him. She's going to ruin his chances in Wheeling society. And so Owen, he has some business. He owns a nail manufacturing plant in Wheeling. And the reason why he owns a nail manufacturing plant is because during my research, I put out a thing to all of my Ohio Valley friends, and people just came out of the woodwork with information. And it turned out that Wheeling, West
Wow.
Virginia, somebody said, you have to put the nail factory in there. And I'm like, nail factory? And they're like, it's up by the hospital. And I'm like, really? So it turns out that Wheeling was the nail manufacturing like center of the whole country. They sold more nails in Wheeling, West Virginia than anywhere else. So that's what Owen does. He owns this. So he's doing some business. Somebody mentions Camilla that she took. Who did she take in hand? Adelaide in hand. And then Adelaide turns into being like fawned over by the New York 400. So Owen's like, well, that sounds good. She could take my I think her name is Luella. I got that name from one of my Ohio Valley friends too. So he's going off to try to find her. He's been told she's on the Hudson River Valley. So he's just riding his horse, minding his own business, and he hears this commotion going off. So he goes to investigate. But Camilla and a woman who is riding with her, who is her paid companion, they mistake him for one of the people chasing them,
The
and yeah,
kidnappers,
one
yeah.
of the kidnappers. So they get away from him, and by accident, because there's some raccoons that are involved in the beginning of the story, and so um, Camilla goes on her way. Um, Owen has lost her, and he's thinking, well, she's probably safe. He's scared off the kidnappers. And so then he shows up at their home, the Pierpont home on the Hudson, and then she is appalled because she's convinced that this is one of her kidnappers has come to finish the job. There you go.
I mean, they're just determined to fall in love then if she thinks he's a kidnapper and
Yes,
yeah.
right? Exactly. And then so what happens, I'm not gonna give too much away, but there's a
Yeah, don't give
reason
too much away.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden. So of course he finally gets around to presenting his proposition. Could you please come and take my sister in hand? And no, 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 no. Then something happens, she gets a telegram, and something from her past is gonna be in New York, and she needs to get out of there. So where better for her to go than Wheeling, West Virginia. And so that's what she does. She goes down there, and yes, she's never experienced anything like that before in her life. And the reason Owen doesn't treat her how she's accustomed to being treated, because everybody
Mm,
fawns over her. She's this grand heiress, and um, even though she's vowed to never marry, that doesn't mean that gentlemen of the New York 400 have not tried to change her mind. So she's
right.
pursued, and she's always complimented, and she's showered with, you know, candy and flowers and pretty gestures, and she doesn't and Owen is not like that. Owen is very straightforward. He's very blunt, sometimes just downright rude. He comes across, but he's very like he's not obstinate. So when she points out, like, well, that's a rude thing to say, he modifies his behavior. So she likes that. He's actually listening to what she's
Mm.
saying, and then she starts to see that beneath all of his bluster, he's a very kind man, and he's incredibly protective. So there you go.
I love it. And so what I love, like the fish out of water story, is you get to see people interacting in ways where all of a sudden they're like, wait, she's used to certain things. And then suddenly these things aren't happening. People aren't treating her a certain way. And it reminds me, like years ago, I went to a blogging conference. I got invited as a speaker, and I was a book writer, a novelist. And so I didn't know like who were the popular bloggers and who were the not popular bloggers because I just didn't know that world. And I'd be talking to someone and people are like, oh my goodness, you were talking to so and so. And I'm like, I have no idea. She's just a person. And so I think that this gives you that experience of getting to like discover the real person, even though they're used to all these people giving them certain attentions and all these other society things that we don't even think about that we're in that age. Like you said, there are the rules and this and that, and this is the way you act, and this is what you wear, and this is where you go during certain times of year. And when you step out of that, then you really get to discover who the person is without all that going on.
Exactly. And it's a story, yeah, it's about discovering who you really are, and where you're, perhaps that life in the New York 400. There's
Mhm.
something lacking in that for Camilla, so she discovers that there's a completely different world out there, and it was just fun because there's so many things you can throw at a heroine who is used to a pampered life, and then all of a sudden there's a Mima, the grandmother, and that was from one of my friends in the Ohio Valley. They said, well, you have to have a Mima. And I'm like, a Mima? And they're, yeah, like the grandmother. And I'm like, I'm from that area, but I never called my grandmother Mima,
Right.
so there's things like that I put in there. And then there were also like the food around that area. Someone had mentioned ramps to me, and I did not know what ramps were. I remember somebody had written a blog about them from like, it was like a Ohio Valley blog, and I glanced over it, but I didn't really recall. And those are like, they grow by creeks down more southern Ohio than where I'm from, but they're like
Mhm.
onions. And so they would be, especially back in the 1800s, people would go and harvest these. I guess to this day, Trisha, there is a ramps festival in some part of Ohio, southern Ohio, and um, this they're really smelly. Apparently, the stench can be so bad that you can smell it like 20 miles away when they hold this festival. So people started, as soon as I mentioned ramps, they started like coming out with things they remember. They're like grandmother saying back in the day, and I guess the saying was, "You never ate ramps past Thursday." Because you didn't want to be the stink in church. And so, you know what, when you find something like that, you put that in there, and of course, you know, Camilla's never been familiar with people really being smelly or, so it was a lot of fun. And the best part of this, one of the funnest things with this book was I never put people I know in my books ever. It
Mhm.
just does not work for me. It messes me up. And but as I'm throwing out all this stuff onto Facebook or Instagram or whatever, asking for, I always ask for names, like pull out your family tree, and that's why I got Temperance Flower Dew, which I'm just gonna put us out there again. I tell people all the time, I did not make up that name. She's a real person. She was an ancestor of one of my good friends from high school. So I had,
Wow.
yeah, she was actually a lady Temperance Flower Dew. I've gotten more letters about that from people being like, "That's a ridiculous name. You shouldn't make up names like that." That was like a totally real name. So the same thing with Mercy Minor was in the same book. I got that from the same friend. So I went on Facebook, and because I was actually, I had done like the first draft, right? And so then I go through and I have all this whole editing process, but I didn't like this one name. So I jump on Facebook. I'm like, listen, I don't like the name of this character. Does anybody have, an old name, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, there's a friend of mine from high school. His name's John Nemedy. And we never dated. I'm just putting that out there. We're just always super good friends. Like I had a very tight group of friends I ran around with. And he always called me Red because my red hair, and everyone calls him Nems. He shows up, and every time I post something, he's always saying, like, I really think you need a character with the name of Nems. Or I'll be like, I'm still waiting to see that character named Nems show up in your book, Jen. So of course he shows up this day. Well, the weird thing was, Trisha, was that I was done with the first draft. So it wasn't like I'd actually be creating a character. So I'm like, hmm, I have this one character in mind because I'm like, I could just do like a search and find and replace the name, right? That's what I did. So
Oh,
John
wow.
in this book, and I verified with him that this was okay because I just thought it was hilarious. Originally, the character had been named Dur, and he was a one-legged carriage driver who was just hilarious. So I told John, I'm like, okay, what do you think about being a one-legged carriage driver? Because I could definitely do that in this book. And he goes, oh, I'm all about that. I'm all about that. So I did. So he's Nems and he's in this book. And because he is my friend, I gave him back his teeth because Durr originally did not have his teeth. So I thought, so I went back for a high school reunion this past fall, and he, I think everybody was just sick of hearing him, because he's like, I am the one-legged carriage driver in Jen's new book, and everybody knows I don't name, I just don't, so he's hoping that I'll get back to do a book signing in my hometown because he would like to like dress up like the one-legged carriage driver, and then I don't know, give people rides through town on a horse and buggy.
You totally need to do that,
Would that
though.
be
Plus,
hilarious?
because you talked about the setting being there. I mean, that must have added this whole new element too, like growing up in the area and these little things that you would know and these details that would be in the book that probably no one else would know or be able to pick up
Well,
on.
yeah, and the funny thing is that, like, how when you grow up somewhere, you're unaware of some of the stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
never really understood why in Wheeling Island, and Wheeling Island is this crazy place. Like, I mean, it's pretty run down now, but all the houses are built up. Well, they're built up high because it literally sits in the middle. It's just this weird island in the middle of the Ohio River. I mean, it's just the Ohio River, but you've got this island, and it would flood all the time. And it's connected to Wheeling with one of the oldest suspension bridges in the country. And I hate that bridge. My parents used to, my sister was a cheerleader, she's a little bit older than I am, and she was always in the Christmas parade during high school. So my dad, to avoid all the traffic, would park on Wheeling Island and we would have to walk over the suspension bridge. And it's a grate. The floor is a grate. So you're seeing everything, the water and everything, the boats you're going underneath. Ooh. So I had to include that. And it sways back and forth. It was considered an engineering marvel back in the day. Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, all those things that you would never even realize that were part of history. And like you talked about the nail factory. Like there's so many things that like, oh, okay, that was a big, big, big deal back in the
Well,
day.
yeah,
Where yeah, where all the nails came
but
from.
and now you wouldn't even think about that, like, but I've never considered, like, where were the nails made, for all the building, especially with the Industrial Revolution, like, there was so much building going on, so they got them from Wheeling, and, there was more income per capita in Wheeling, West Virginia during the Gilded Age than there was in New York City. I had no idea, so there
Wow.
was a so I and when I went back, I did go, and there were just these huge old houses that what I mean? Like you just don't even notice them when you're young. I mean, we would go. There was
Right.
like Wheeling Park was a place they would do like those summer dances, that you would go to when you're in high school. So I didn't bother looking at the architecture on the way up there, but there's gorgeous buildings there. So, and the house that where Owen lives, they have built it outside of Wheeling, and it was inspired by the Ogilvy Mansion, which the Ogilvies were, I believe, they were in Cole, and it's this big resort now, but the mansion is still there. And I remember taking tours of it when I was in school growing up, and we used to always have our proms at the Ogilvy Resort. So that's what inspired the whole where they live. So,
Yeah, I love it. It's so fascinating. And I love, like, we're reading historical fiction and it's like we get caught up in the story, but then to realize like all these little details are inspired or based on real things. I feel like I learned so much about history in areas I never would have thought to visit. I don't even think I've ever been to West Virginia, let
you know
alone,
what? And it's really like they used to before the malls came around. So downtown Wheeling, they had all the department
uh huh.
stores. So there was Stone and Thomas, where I used to work. There was LL Good and Company. There was Horns from Pittsburgh, and there was this bakery that sat right on the plaza, and they had maneuvered their fans so it smelled like cookies. The whole
Ah,
plaza smelled like cookies, and so every time you would go down there, you would go to the bakery, and it's no longer there. And then the High Valley Mall came right in the little town I lived in is where they built the High Valley Mall. Totally killed downtown Wheeling.
mm,
So, um,
mhm.
but now they have now they have people who have come in and taken some of those old houses, and there's like a winery, and you know what I mean, like places that you can go, these restaurants, but it's almost like it's like you're back in the Gilded Age, and you're in these old homes with like the really cool architectural detail, the really dark molding around the ceilings, and yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I love it. I love going through those places and just realizing like this was the thing in the time.
Hmm.
Like as all the ceilings and the molding and all the decorative stuff, like this was the top of the top back in the day. And now, it's just like old and run down. But I don't know, I just love picturing those things. And so for you to bring your books to life in that era, it's just so fun to just experience that. Okay, so cool. Okay, so the 3-book series, go ahead and list the name of all 3 books again,
Okay, so the first one
so that
is A Match in the Making. It is the first book, and that is Gwendolyn's story. She is
mhm.
an unintentional matchmaker. She was supposed to be a paid companion, and her employer broke her leg with a three-legged race. That came from real life. And so she was pulled into service as a matchmaker for that season. The second book is To Spark a Match, Adelaide Devine's story. This book opens up with her walking across the ballroom, like you said, and she has the back of her hem has gotten stuck in her bustle. So she has shown everybody her unmentionables, which is a huge,
Woohoo!
huge faux pas. And her unmentionables are embroidered with cats on them. And she's a huge cat lover, and that was from true life as well. Something similar to that did happen to me. And then the third and final book is Meeting Her Match, and this is Camilla's story, the one that's based in. Wheeling, West Virginia. So, and this model is very, she looks like my sister, Gretchen.
Does she look like you? She kinda looks I could see that.
She looks like, so
Yeah.
my sister Gretchen was blonde hair, and I was red, but this looks like my sister Gretchen. So she always wants me to tell everybody that.
Oh, that you're like, "Basically, it's like my
This
sister.
is just, this
Basically my
just looks like my
sister."
sister. So yeah. And
I love
there we
it.
go. So yeah, that's the third and final book in the Matchmaker series.
Yeah, and so if you like light, fun, historically interesting, but also there's humor, there's outlandish situations happening all the time, which Jen is like, "Oh, let's just do this," and I'm like, "Only Jen would be able to get away with
With
this in
doing
her
that, right?
books."
Yes, you gotta throw in, like, some raccoons, or I just remember, like, clear back in the day, I had gone to some writing workshop or something, and I just remember this, whoever the speaker was, so, like, you should just, like, so you throw something, she was talking about the Hunger Games and how
Oh,
well,
okay.
Suzanne Collins had done, because she said, "So you throw something horrible at Katniss." She's like, "And before you can even recover from that, you're throwing something else at her." She's like, and that's what really keeps your story going on. So that's like with me, because I'm known for, I mean, I write comedies. So it's like you just have to throw something that's completely out there just to mix things up a little bit.
Yeah, and it's so fun, and then you see how they react, and then that just really leads to all kinds of situations, and then you get to discover more about the person by seeing how they react to different situations,
Yes,
which is fun.
indeed.
Yeah, super fun. Okay, so are you working on more books right now? Like, what can we
I am.
expect
So
in the
I'm
future?
working
I know,
on,
I mean, this is brand new, brand new. You just got the books today in the
yes,
mail,
they just
so
came in
brand
the
new.
mail. So this comes out July 16th officially. But I am working on a new series. I just got the official titles for that. I rarely pick out the titles for my books. I did for one book in this series, A Match in the Making. That was me. The other ones were either my street team or my editing team. So I just got the official. So the series is going to be the Meriwether Academy for Young Ladies. The first
Mm,
book, I am working on developmental edits.
okay.
So for those of you who don't know what that is I write the book. I mean, I go through a lot of editing. Then I turn it into my editors. They give me the suggestions, and I'm pretty much rewriting a good portion of the book because their suggestions are like have that ripple effect. So I'm doing those right now. That book is going to be officially called, I can draw it up blank. Um, A Lesson in Propriety.
Ooh,
Mhm.
I like it. I
Yes,
like
and
it.
then the second book is going to be called In Pursuit of Civility. And
Ooh.
then the third book is, and I chose this title, came up with it on my own, A Dash of Decorum. Mhm.
Ah, those are so cute, and those are so you.
Yeah.
Oh my
So it's, I
goodness.
mean, it's a ladies' academy, but it's a gen book. So it's not like a normal academy. And the first book really just deals with how this, her name is Drusilla Merriweather, and how it came to be that she's going to open it up an academy in the first place, because she is a member of the New York 400, and the Merriweather fortune has been stolen. So not only has it been stolen, her fiance, Albert Harrington, it opens up. They are having tea at Rutherford and Company's tea room, and that's a department store that I made up quite a few books ago. But it comes back every once in a while. They're having tea,
Yeah.
and he informs her that he just really does believe it will be for the best if they consider perhaps indefinitely not going through with their wedding. So he's tossing her aside when the book opens.
Oh my goodness.
Yes,
Poor woman.
I know. But luckily, her Aunt Amelie had given her and her sister Annalise a piece of property in Chicago that they've never seen. Because again, these women are grand heiresses, and
Right.
they would not want to travel to Chicago, because Chicago was not as fashionable for the New York 400 as New York City was. So that's where we are. So I will finish up doing my developmental edits, and then I'll move on to book two.
That's so fun. And I love that, as this book is releasing, brand new, your mind's already completely over there in the new book. And I love you just can continue on and bring us these fun, light stories. So I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that you always have all the fun ideas and all the cute titles, and people know that they can get fully carried away when they get into your books.
Well,
So
I
that's
mean,
awesome.
sometimes you do have to suspend, reality just a little bit. Remember, it's fiction. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
Like, that might not really be able to happen, but it's pretty funny, so that's why Jen threw it
yeah.
in there.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so where can people go to find out about your new book and then all the other books that you've written?
You can visit me on the web. It's just jenturano.com. And I mostly do Instagram, Jen Turano author, and then my Facebook author page, Jen Turano author there as well. That's where I do most of my interactions with people.
And you never know, like you could be asked to use a ancestor's name, and it might show up in one of Jen's books.
That is a very good possibility. Because yeah, I do believe, I think it's Luella was my girlfriend Tammy's some relative of hers. Tammy lived with me. She went to St. Clairsville High School with me. Then she lived with me for all 4 years in college. Bless
All
her
right,
heart.
bless her heart. I love it. Well, thank you, Jen, for being here. It's always super fun to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love coming on your show.
Thank you.